Would you like to live without pain, suffering, or illness? Learn the secrets of achieving extraordinary health. Write down this phone number, 219-769-LIFE. That's 219-769-5433. You want more information on treatment options for you? With this edition of Inspired Living, here is Dr. Matt Hammett.
Welcome to our Northwest Indiana community impact event, the Sleep Switch and Chiropractic Care, how to effectively help sleep disorders naturally. The purpose of Northwest Indiana Community Impact is to challenge the mainstream thinking on what may be the cause of some conditions and to encourage researchers to think outside the normal boundaries when looking for solutions. Sid Caesar was a very popular comedian in the 1950s and 60s, and someone told me that he once did a routine in which he had insomnia, was tossing and turning and disturbing his wife, so she told him he had to get help. And after he takes his visit to the doctor, that night he says, "Honey, I saw a sleep doctor today and I know just what to do." He gets in bed, closes his eyes, and begins repeating words that sounds like something from a famous children's book called Good Night Moon. Good night feet, good night ankles, good night legs and good night knees, good night buttocks and good night belly button, good night chest and good night arms, good night facial muscles and good night eyes. As he moves his way up through his body, finally he says, "Good night brain," and a long pause. I said, "Good night, brain." So much for meditating using progressive muscle relaxation. You see, there is quite a catch. Your brain is quite active at night and actually aggressively engaged during sleep. In fact, research from an article in the Washington Post called "Want to Enjoy the Deep Mystical Sleep of Our Ancestors" say, turn your lights off at dusk. It reports that science is discovering that you have to be willing to revert to a Paleolithic pattern of sleep. And that means turning off your electric lights at dusk and leaving them off until dawn. Do that, and in about 3 weeks' time, beginning around 6 hours after sunset each evening, you will find yourself experiencing a period of serene wakefulness. That was once a nightly meditation retreat for all Homo sapiens on Earth. It's a guarantee. It's encoded in your genes. During the mid-1990s, sleep researcher Thomas Weir conducted a National Institutes of Health experiment that he later called an exercise in archaeology or human paleobiology. Dr. Weir wanted to find out if modern humans still carried within them the rhythms for a prehistoric mode of sleep. Did prehistoric humans sleep more? Did they sleep differently or perhaps better? Dr. Weir's logic was simple. Aided by the stimulating effects of all kinds of artificial lighting, everything from laptop screens to the bright lights of big cities, modern humans had compressed their sleep nights, like their work days, into convenient 8-hour blocks. And yet, given that light-assisted wakefulness was a relatively new invention, wasn't it possible that human beings still carried in their DNA the remnants of a more ancient pattern of sleep? The results were staggering. For 1 month, beginning at dusk and ending at dawn, Dr. Weir's subjects were removed from every possible form of artificial light. And during the first 3 weeks, they slept as usual, only for about an hour longer. Now, after all, he reasoned, like most Americans, they were probably sleep deprived. But at week 4, a dramatic change occurred. The participants slept the same number of hours as before, but now their sleep was divided in 2. They began each night with about 4 hours of deep sleep, woke for 2 hours of quiet rest, then slept for another 4. And during the gap between their first and second sleep, Dr. Weir's subjects were neither awake nor fully asleep. Rather, they experienced a condition they had never known before, a state of consciousness all on its own. Later, Dr. Weir would compare it to what advanced practitioners experience in meditation, what you might call mindfulness today. But they weren't any mindfulness practitioners in his study. They were simply ordinary people who, removed for 1 month from artificial lighting, found their nights broken in two. While trying to account for the peace and serenity that his subjects reported feeling during their hours of quiet rest, Dr. Weir discovered that prolactin, the hormone that rises in nursing mothers when their milk lets down, reaches elevated levels in their bodies shortly after dusk, remaining at twice its normal waking level throughout the full length of the night. Prolactin creates a feeling of security, quietness, and peace, and it is intimately and biologically tied to the dark. Even during their hours of quiet rest, the prolactin levels in Dr. Weir's subjects remain steady. Normally, if you wake in the night, those levels will go down, even if you don't turn on the lights. But if you turn the lights off at dusk and keep them off, giving your body the full spectrum of the night to work from, that richer, deeper darkness will fashion an experience so different from your normal daylight consciousness, it is almost a mystical state. There is a state not terribly familiar to modern sleepers, and Dr. Weir lamented when the study was done and he had begun to wrap his mind around the enormity of a discovery that turned modern consciousness on its head. Perhaps what those who meditate today are seeking is a state that our ancestors would have considered their birthright, a nightly occurrence. Today's sleep science, which once looked at hormonal levels, primarily has gone neuroscience. The methods of treatment have been most alarming because the majority of studies suggest cures may lie not in a pharmacology approach, but in a drug-free lifestyle approach. And certainly, some cases may require drugs and even surgery. It's nice to know that the majority of sleep deprivation may be solved with a Paleolithic lifestyle, chiropractic care, and other drug-free natural approaches. In fact, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine Task Force reviewed 48 clinical trials to prepare practice strategies for drug-free treatment policies and managing chronic insomnia. It found that non-pharmacologic treatment provided reliable, lasting changes for 70 to 80% of chronic insomnia sufferers in several sleep parameters. And certainly there is little evidence for chiropractic treatment of insomnia, but the little we have is quite promising. And keep in mind, over 80% of research that meets Western medicine standard or the famous random controlled trials are very expensive and performed on rats and animals. How expensive, you ask? Well, consider this. Typically each year, Harvard gets about $1 billion for research. Starting in 1895, the profession of chiropractic has only received about $20 million total. That's just one observation. So observational data and human case studies in many cases are more beneficial because they're done on humans. I don't know about you, but a rat ain't a miniature human. And there's a wealth of information available about insomnia diagnosis and treatment of which many chiropractors may not be aware. Sleep disturbance such as insomnia is common in patients suffering from chronic musculoskeletal pain. Other chronic pain syndromes such as fibromyalgia are almost always associated with sleep disturbances and fatigue. A study from the European Journal of Pain investigated the relationship between health status, sleep disorder, and musculoskeletal pain in the cranial-mandibular and cervical spine regions. The authors concluded that sleep disorders are frequently found in patients with chronic trigeminal cervical pain, meaning nerve and neck pain. Chiropractic treatment has been shown to be effective in the treatment of chronic pain and chronic pain syndromes such as fibromyalgia. Doctors Haynes, two Quebec Canadian chiropractors, noted in their study on fibromyalgia that pain and sleep disturbance were improved after chiropractic adjustments in 60 to 63% of patients, respectively. Research from over 20 years ago suggests that chiropractic spinal manipulative therapy may affect two neurological pathways, One pathway involves a special neuron called GABA. At the same time, a second pathway is ignited called the sleep switch. The first pathway involves type 1 and 2 mechanoreceptors by exciting a GABA neuron, which is a specialized neuron that interrupts the transmission of nerve impulses from the thalamus to the limbic system. The thalamus is where extensive nerve networks send signals all around the structures of the brain, including the cerebral cortex. It is involved in sensory and motor signal relay and the regulation of consciousness and sleep. And the limbic system is involved in motivation, emotion, learning, and memory. At the same time the thalamus and limbic system engages, a second pathway exists, the sleep switch. The dorsal column, where the alpha beta fibers or another specialized nerve fibers stimulates the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is responsible for the process of falling asleep. This structure, and in particular its preoptic area, appears to be sensitive to the serotonin released during waking periods. Apparently, when serotonin stimulates this preoptic area of the anterior hypothalamus, its GABAergic neurons in turn inhibit the posterior hypothalamus, thus encouraging sleep. And damage to these GABAergic neurons is known to cause insomnia, whereas stimulating them causes experimental subjects to fall asleep rapidly. And the preoptic area in the hypothalamus houses the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus, a dense cluster of neurons that become active when non-rapid eye movement sleep is initiated. Nearly 80% of these neurons contain specialized enzymes. These enzymes are known to inhibit the locus coeruleus, the descending projection from the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus, which is likely to be inhibitory in nature and allows relaxation of the mind, thus promoting non-rapid eye movement sleep. If this specialized nucleus within the hypothalamus is stimulated by the alpha-beta fibers, normal proprioception will have an effect on this nucleus. In other words, the chiropractic adjustments may have an effect on this nucleus following an adjustment because proprioceptive input by the adjustment stimulates the alpha-beta nerve fibers and activates the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus, so non-rapid eye movement sleep can initiate. In fact, a PubMed journal, Trends in Neuroscience, published an article naming this alpha-beta fiber stimulation into the hypothalamus cycle the sleep switch. Thus, the neurological pathways following the chiropractic adjustment have been drawn up and initiate two neurological mechanisms. First, the preoptic area in the hypothalamus initiating non-rapid eye movement sleep due to GABA and other specialized enzymes that enable relaxation. The second mechanism involves initiating the sleep switch, so non-rapid eye movement sleep can initiate. Keep in mind, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine Task Force, which reviewed those 48 clinical trials to prepare practice strategies for drug-free treatment policies and managing chronic insomnia, they found that drug-free and natural treatments provide reliable, lasting changes for 70 to 80% of chronic insomnia sufferers in several sleep parameters. Here are a few of some sleep disorders the chiropractic care may be able to help. Types of sleep disorders include insomnia, hypersomnia, sleep apnea, and narcolepsy, just to name a few. Insomnia is the perception or complaint of inadequate or poor quality sleep because one or more of the following: difficulty falling asleep, waking up frequently during the night with difficulty returning to sleep, waking up too early in the morning and or unrefreshing sleep. Hypersomnia is extreme sleepiness with excessive periods of sleep and difficulty awaking. Patients with sleep apnea stop breathing repeatedly during sleep, causing them to awaken frequently. Once awakened, breathing resumes. Narcolepsy is excessive and overwhelming daytime sleepiness, even after adequate nighttime sleep hours, where a person may require many naps throughout the day lasting a few minutes or hours. Evidence supports that trauma, in particular mild concussive injury to the head, neck, or upper back, precedes the onset of sleep disorders such as insomnia, hypersomnia, sleep apnea, and narcolepsy, and in certain cases. Following the trauma, sleep disorders can be triggered immediately or can take months or years to develop. Insomnia is frequently associated with depression, which is also linked to head trauma in the medical literature. The purpose of chiropractic care is to reverse the trauma-induced upper neck injury, thereby reducing irritation to the injured nerves in the central nervous system, the brain, and the spinal cord. While many sleep disorder sufferers recall specific traumas such as head injuries, auto accidents, or falls, some do not. A chiropractic examination utilizing specialized radiography and digital infrared imaging may be necessary in each individual's case to assess whether an upper cervical injury is present and whether benefit from chiropractic care can be achieved. I'm Dr. Matt Hammett, encouraging you to live well.